What if the virtue we praise the most is actually the one holding us back the most? What if discipline, the word we repeat like a mantra, the one we link to success, maturity, and personal growth, is nothing more than a trap disguised as virtue? In an age obsessed with routine, habits, and controlling every second of our day, questioning discipline almost feels like blasphemy. But maybe, right there in that discomfort, lies a truth we're too afraid to face head-on. There's something deeply human about trying to tame chaos. We want life to have structure, to make sense, to reward our efforts with predictable results. We cling to discipline like someone driving a stake into the ground during a storm. If I stay consistent, I'll be fine. If I follow the plan, things will work out. If I stay organized, I'll win. And sure, sometimes that works. But what happens when the world refuses to follow our plans? When the unexpected breaks everything apart? What happens when chaos isn't something we can avoid, but something that demands to be met head-on with something wilder, more raw, more instinctive than discipline? Niccolò Machiavelli understood this with a kind of unsettling clarity. The world doesn't reward the kindest, the most consistent, or even the most disciplined. The world, our ruthless and ever-changing stage where power, life, failure, and glory are all at play, rewards the one who knows how to move through the storm. The one who doesn't flinch when the rules stop making sense. The one who, when the time comes, knows how to get their hands dirty. Machiavelli's thinking isn't comforting, but it's real. He didn't write to soothe us. He wrote to strip away illusions and expose what truly drives people. And in his pages, there's no room for the fantasy that just being good and working hard will bring you victory. In fact, for him, someone who acts with too much rigidity, someone who clings blindly to their discipline, becomes an easy target for fortune. Fortune, Machiavelli said, is like a wild river. You can try to contain it with dams, with solid structures, with carefully crafted plans. But when the storm hits, all of that can collapse. What survives isn't the stone, but the motion. Not foresight, but adaptability. That's why, in his eyes, the virtue that matters isn't discipline. It's virtue, that fierce ability to act, to improvise, to break with the established order when the moment calls for it. The virtuous man, to Machiavelli, isn't the obedient one. He's the one who knows when to disobey, even his own values. Picture someone who's deeply disciplined. They wake up at the same time every day, follow a strict routine, push themselves constantly, and live by the belief that consistency is everything. Now picture that person thrown into a situation that's messy, chaotic, unpredictable. Something that wasn't in their planner. Something that demands a break from logic. That person, locked inside their structure, might freeze. Because their strength lies in control, not boldness. And control, in the wrong moment, is just another form of blindness. History is full of men and women who didn't lose because they lacked effort, but because they were too rigid. They couldn't adapt when the world shifted violently. They clung to what used to work, unable to see that the world they were trained for no longer existed. In that sense, being disciplined can become a way of denying reality. A way of insisting on a direction simply because it once made sense. Like a sailor still navigating by old maps, unaware the waters have changed. But there's something even darker at play. Sometimes, behind discipline, there's fear. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of being judged. Fear of the chaos that comes with improvisation. In those cases, discipline isn't a virtue, it's a hiding place. A socially acceptable way to mask cowardice. It's easier to stick to a routine than to make uncomfortable decisions. It feels safer to repeat than to take a real risk. And that's where Machiavelli hits hardest. Power isn't built from comfort. It's built from tension, from the boldness of doing what others don't even dare to imagine. This isn't about glorifying disorder or impulsiveness. Machiavelli wasn't a cheerleader for chaos just for the sake of it. But he knew there are moments when order becomes a prison. Times when the only way out is to break the mold. And those who can't do that are doomed to be swept away. Maybe that's why people so often misunderstand Machiavelli. They label him Machiavellian in the worst sense, like he's advocating for evil or betrayal. But that's not the point. He simply had the guts to say what most people refuse to admit. The world doesn't reward goodness. It rewards effectiveness. The good will lose if they don't learn how to be dangerous. And the disciplined will fail if they don't know when to throw out their own script. So no, being disciplined isn't bad in itself. But it can become absolutely absolutely destructive when it replaces intelligence, intuition, and the ability to read the moment for what it really is. When it becomes an excuse not to think, or an armor that keeps us from feeling. In a world that's becoming more automated by the day, where we glorify routines, habits, and algorithms, Machiavelli's ideas land like a slap in the face. They remind us that we're still human, not machines. That power, survival, and greatness don't come from perfect order, but from chaos, well handled. There's no manual for life, just moments and choices. Maybe that's why what he wrote makes us so uncomfortable. Because deep down, we want him to be wrong. We want to believe that being good, consistent, and disciplined is enough. But life, like power, is wild. And it doesn't care about the rules of those too afraid to adapt. Maybe it's time we stop blindly worshiping discipline. Maybe we need to ask ourselves if, in certain moments, breaking the structure isn't a betrayal, but a higher form of wisdom. And maybe it's time we finally accept what Machiavelli made so clear: those who can't adapt, drown. Even if they've been swimming in a straight line for years. We're taught to follow schedules, obey instructions, keep promises, and measure progress with checklists and calendars. We're raised to see discipline as the ultimate virtue, the thing that brings order, fixes everything, and gets results. And in many cases, it does seem to work. But there's a silent trap in that belief. It blinds us to everything that can't be controlled. It prepares us for consistency, but not for disruption. It makes us experts in persistence, but amateurs in strategy. It makes us strong in repetition, but clumsy when it comes to change. Machiavelli didn't live in a peaceful or stable world. His Florence was a city tangled in wars, betrayals, short-lived alliances, and invisible enemies. For him, the man who survives isn't the one who clings to his virtue, it's the one who knows when to drop it. The one who can, with the same ease, be generous or ruthless, patient or impulsive, depending on what the moment demands. And that's where discipline becomes dangerous, because it resists change, because it kills the flexibility we need to adapt. Believing you can behave the same way in every situation is a form of arrogance. It's like trying to force the world to play by your rules. But the world doesn't listen. It tests us with the unexpected, the uncomfortable, the things that don't fit into our plans. And in those moments, the overly disciplined person breaks. They can't step off the path. They can't live without a map. It's strange how the praise of discipline has crept into even the most personal spaces. Going to bed at the same time every night. Eating at exact intervals. Meditating with a timed app. Working out at the same hour, with the same routine, every single day. There's nothing wrong with any of that, unless it becomes your identity. Unless you stop being someone who uses discipline and start being someone who is disciplined. And then, without even realizing it, you start rejecting everything you can't control. Everything that interrupts. Everything that surprises. Machiavelli saw fortune, that unpredictable force behind events, as a dangerous enemy, but also an unavoidable one. No one escapes chance. The only thing we can do is prepare ourselves, not to control it, but to respond to it with intelligence. And that response almost never comes from routine. When chaos hits, no calendar can save you. No habit will shield you. All that's left is a sharp eye and the ability to read what's really happening, even if it contradicts everything you've learned. A lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that life rewards effort. That if you work harder than everyone else, if you're more disciplined, if you sacrifice more, you'll get what you want. But that's not always true. Because sometimes, effort in the wrong direction only drags you down faster. Like someone rowing with all their strength, but heading the wrong way. Like someone stubbornly watering a plant that's already dead. And suddenly, what looked like virtue turns into blind obsession. Discipline turns into mindless stubbornness. It's no coincidence that many of the leaders Machiavelli admired, like Cesare Borgia or Ferdinand of Aragon, were men who could break their own habits if the moment called for it. They weren't slaves to rigid morality or an unshakable plan. They had an internal compass, yes, but not a manual. They knew when to yield, when to strike, when to fake weakness, when to show cruelty. And that elasticity was what made them dangerous and effective. But the person who clings to discipline as the only way to act eventually becomes predictable. And predictability is easy to manipulate, easy to beat. If you always respond the same way, people will see you coming. And in the game of power, Being predictable is a fatal mistake. Maybe that's why so many highly disciplined people carry a deep, quiet frustration they can't explain. They did everything right. They followed the rules. They were consistent. And yet, they didn't get the outcome they expected. Maybe it's not their effort that's failing. Maybe it's their perspective. Because the world doesn't reward the hardest worker. It rewards the one who best understands how things move. And to understand that, sometimes you have to let go of everything you've learned. There's a kind of silent violence in routine, because it convinces us that safety is more valuable than freedom. That predictability is more important than truth. But living isn't about repeating. Living is about daring to change, to make mistakes, to act without guarantees. Discipline, when it's wise, supports that risk. But when it becomes sacred, it suffocates it. Most of life's big decisions don't come from a planner. They're not born from a completed to-do list. They rise up in moments of crisis, of intuition, of disruption. And if you're too locked into your structure, you won't see them coming. Or worse, you'll see them, but you won't know what to do with them. Real power, Machiavelli said, lies in the one who knows how to act at the right moment. And that moment doesn't always arrive with a warning. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes it looks like chaos. And in that moment, the most disciplined doesn't win. The one who dares to break their own logic does. How many times have we delayed decisions because the time wasn't right, because the plan didn't include it, because it wasn't on the agenda? How many opportunities have we missed because we were too busy sticking to a system that, deep down, had already stopped serving us? Discipline gives us structure, sure, but it also gives us excuses. And the most dangerous excuses are the ones disguised as virtue. This isn't about giving up effort. It's not about living aimlessly. It's about remembering that every structure, no matter how solid, is just a tool, not a destination. That every routine that helps us today can become a prison tomorrow. And that knowing when to let go is also a form of wisdom. Maybe the hardest thing to accept is this: life isn't fair. It doesn't always reward those who do the right thing. Sometimes it only rewards the one who dares, the one who breaks, the one who understands that, as Machiavelli put it, times change, and those who want to survive must change with them. That change isn't always graceful. It's not always logical. Sometimes it requires contradictions, unpopular choices, drastic moves. But that's not weakness. That's adaptability. And in a world that never stops shifting, being adaptable is worth more than being consistent. So maybe real courage isn't waking up at 5 a.m. every day. Maybe real courage is looking at a routine that no longer works and having the guts to walk away from it. Maybe real courage is admitting that even discipline, when it turns into dogma, can pull us away from what we want most. Because living isn't about following a formula. Living is knowing when it's time to leave it behind. What if everything we've been told about discipline was only part of the story? Just a fragment that works when life is calm, but dangerously inadequate when the ground starts to shake? How many choices have we made, convinced that the straight, measured, consistent path was the only one that mattered? And how many times, looking back, have we felt like we lost something precious simply because we didn't have the courage to break the pattern? The truth, when it hits you deep, doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it hurts. It hurts to realize you were a good soldier, fighting for the wrong cause. That you spent years shaping yourself into a form that never really protected you. That never gave you what you hoped for. That didn't prepare you for the moments that truly mattered. There's something heartbreaking about looking at your life with brutal honesty and realizing you may have been more obedient than brave, more consistent than free, more organized than wise. But there's also a kind of freedom hidden inside that pain. Because once you stop idealizing discipline, something deeper starts to stir. The ability to respond, not from rigidity, but from presence, from awareness. It's no longer about checking boxes or following a plan written in permanent ink. It's about being alive, really alive. About looking at the present with open eyes. No filters, no formulas, no fear of the unknown. Machiavelli doesn't ask us to live in chaos. He doesn't glorify disorder for its own sake. What he demands is that we abandon the comfort of automatic answers. That we see clearly that the world owes us no explanation, and certainly no reward for our sacrifices. He forces us to ask with ruthless clarity, Are you acting effectively, or just clinging to an image you were taught to worship? That's probably why his ideas make so many people uncomfortable. Because he doesn't appeal to our desire to feel good, or righteous, or noble. He speaks to our need to survive, to adapt, to win, if that's what we're after. And he shows us, with no sugarcoating, that being good doesn't guarantee a damn thing. That being disciplined, even to an extreme, can lead you straight into irrelevance, if you don't know when to stop, when to shift, when to betray yourself for something greater. Some people are offended by this. They dismiss it quickly because it challenges the identity they've built. But sometimes, the truth that offends us the most is the one we need the most. Offense is often the signal that something inside us is shifting, that a crack is forming in what was once solid. And in that crack, a different kind of light can enter. One that's harsher, yes, but also more honest. If discipline is a tool, then its value depends entirely on the timing. You don't use a hammer to sew, and you don't use a needle to tear down a wall. Discipline is useful when the path is stable, when you need consistency, endurance, commitment. But when the ground is shaking, when the direction changes, when what used to work stops working, clinging to the same tool becomes absurd, becomes destructive, becomes blind. What that moment really needs isn't more discipline, it's more awareness, more agility, a deeper willingness to break from everything you thought was essential. And that kind of break hurts, because we've built ourselves on top of certain convictions. We've told ourselves things like, I'm someone who never gives up, or I always follow through, or I stay loyal to my habits, my principles, my commitments. But sometimes, and Machiavelli knew this better than anyone, moving forward becomes a form of self-destruction. Sometimes, refusing to give up is exactly what brings you down. There's a word that's been deeply misunderstood in our time: betrayal. We see it as something vile, a moral failure. But sometimes, betraying yourself is the only way to grow, to be reborn, to walk away from a version of yourself that no longer fits the life you're actually living. In that sense, giving up on a discipline that no longer serves you is not surrender, it's clarity. Not weakness, but courage. Because some forms of discipline are just prisons with schedules. Others are armor so heavy, you can't move forward wearing it. Sometimes what holds us back isn't a lack of strength. It's the unnecessary weight we carry out of loyalty to an idea that's no longer ours. At its best, discipline means doing the right thing even when no one's watching. But at its worst, it means doing the same thing over and over, even when the world is screaming at you to change. And that difference is massive. One version makes you stronger. The other eats you alive. One makes you adaptable. The other breaks you. Machiavelli didn't write for moralists. He wrote for people who wanted to understand the raw nature of power and survival. For those willing to see the world not as it should be, but as it actually is. And in that world, rigidity kills. Repetition drains you. Blind obedience ruins everything. Maybe now's the time to bring that same brutal honesty into our daily lives. To ask ourselves, sincerely, what things am I still doing out of habit, out of fear, out of inertia? What routines do I repeat even though they no longer give me anything? What parts of me are rotting beneath the illusion of being disciplined or strong? Not all the answers will be comfortable. Some will hurt more than any physical workout, because they require letting go of an idealized version of yourself. They require saying, I'm not that person anymore. They require admitting that real transformation doesn't come from perfecting the surface. It starts from cracking it open. And then, something shifts. A new kind of horizon appears. One that's messier, more uncertain, but also more real. A space where every decision is made from the now, not from the past. Where power doesn't come from compliance, but from choice. Where freedom isn't chaos, but clarity. And where discipline stops being an altar, and finally becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool. Not a sentence. Maybe the clearest sign of growth is this: the ability to let go of even the things that once saved you. Because growing isn't about piling more on. It's about learning when to release. To see the world with new eyes. To stop trying to fit into the image